When we consider this supplemental idea in particular, it also is worth pointing out that even when this request does come, it might have a very difficult time getting to 60 votes in the United States Senate, where you would need a significant number of Democrats to support it, and they are all largely against this war with Iran, which then points us to another potential budget reconciliation package. How nervous does that make you?
All of this makes me nervous. The national security situation makes me nervous, and the fiscal situation makes me nervous. And certainly what's going on right now is revealing huge new costs that we're undertaking, and also probably future costs that we're going to have to deal with, both from some vulnerabilities that have been revealed and bringing down of some of our weapon systems we're going to have to build back up. So yes, this has become a huge political hot potato. Democrats who are feeling left out of the process are likely not to support a supplemental. And so it may have to go through reconciliation. But you're hearing a great deal of concern from even within Republicans that reconciliation may not be the way to go. There's another little piece of this, which is in OBA, the big tax bill, a lot of defense spending was also included in that bill, about $150 billion. On top of the normal appropriations. So we know that there's more set aside for defense already. What we don't know is how it will be spent, how it's going to be spent, if there's money there that could be used before there's a supplemental or reconciliation. So I think the big question is not only is what is the strategy of this war that we're in, but where are the needs and where are the plans for spending the money we already have before we put in place new dollars. And I think everybody would agree national security is sort of the first most important claim on budgetary dollars, but the defense budget is big and complicated, and the money may already be there.
Maya, it's great to see you. You issued a statement following the President's State of the Union that said the state of our union is more indebted than ever. Ultimately, you wrote, the president's agenda thus far has added significantly to the national debt, and we will be spending even more because of our past refusal to pay for our priorities. You point out interest payments on the debt will total nearly $17 trillion between now and 2036. That's before a protracted war in the Middle East. How much worse could this get?
There's no ceiling on how much worse this could get. First, this is one of those moments that reminds us how dangerous it is that we're already spending more on interest payments than we are in national defense. This is why we don't want to be in that situation. Second, a situation like the one we're in could have huge costs in terms of if it costs $1 billion a day or anything close to that, those costs could skyrocket so quickly. Also, it could have profound, pronounced economic effects, what we're seeing all the time and talking about all the time right now, which could have a hard-hitting effect on the U.S. economy. And this could get worse before it gets better. One of the main reasons you want a strong fiscal foundation is to be ready for moments like this. And the big concern is that the U.S. has borrowed so much just for consumption, just for things we didn't want to pay for, that when real emergencies come along, we are not in good shape to respond to them or have the fiscal flexibility to do so that we should be able to if we had been in better fiscal shape.
Well, so when we consider emergencies, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget put out a new break glass plan, essentially how you withstand an economic shock without having to contribute more to the deficit, like we've seen with shocks in the past, like COVID, for example, and stimulus checks. I wonder if you see us as getting closer to that kind of break glass moment, especially with a war in the Middle East that could potentially have dire economic consequences with a supply shock and potential reinflationary effects. Are we on that trajectory right now?
Yeah, exactly. When we released this a week or so ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, we certainly didn't think that an emergency would be hitting us quite so immediately. And the concern is that if we have to borrow for an emergency, if it's a supplemental for the war that we're going through right now, if there's a recession, if there's another kind of emergency that's unanticipated or a pandemic, we don't have the same fiscal space to borrow that we have had in the past because our debt is at near record levels. And so what we're recommending is that if we do borrow $50 billion for what's going on right now, or even more, we need to offset those costs. Not immediately, not in the same moment if you're in a recession, but you need to have a plan not only to borrow the money for the emergency, but how to offset it. And more than that, we think you should offset it by $2 to 1 so that we would start putting down payments towards deficit reduction. Put in place automatic changes to the budget. put us on a trajectory so we would bring our deficits down to the goal that so many people are starting to think makes the most sense, which is 3% of GDP compared to the 6% where we currently are. But don't use an emergency or don't let an emergency create an even more indebted situation than we currently have. We need to agree that whenever we borrow for an emergency, we're also going to have the plan to offset or pay for those costs and use it as a moment to get our fiscal house in better shape than it currently is. I hope lawmakers will put this in place. I'm sorry.
No, we saw your testimony to this end before the Senate Finance Subcommittee on Fiscal Responsibility and Economic Growth, Maya. The idea of a $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget. Of course, that would, I guess, presumably go through regular order to get a number of that size. A 50% increase would mean what for our national debt?
We are talking trillions more. We are talking multiple trillions more just from that increase. And it's not to say that we do or don't need that. One of the things about our group, we don't really weigh in on the policies. What we want is to be able to have a national security budget that reflects the risks of the world that we're in. We don't want to be deciding national security based on our budget. And we have switched to that's the situation. Now, that sounds like a huge increase. Given that we can't even audit the Defense Department, we need to understand the money that's there already, and there are certainly savings to be had in the procurement process, in paying for outdated weapon systems. Right now, we have basically a defense posture that's set up for last century's threats instead of this century's. We really need to rethink all of that. There will be new costs, and there's probably trillions of dollars of savings we'll be able to get over time. But if there are needs for defense increases, we have to budget for them. We have to be willing to figure out where we're either going to pay more in taxes or reduce spending in other parts of the budget. But right now, this offhanded sort of approach of we can just increase the defense budget by 50%, there's no room in the budget for that. And this is the moment that people have been warning about, that the world is very risky, and we have a budget that now makes us very vulnerable.
Well, and Maya, on this idea of finding other offsets elsewhere in the budget, we've all seen the pie chart. When you look at U.S. federal spending, we spend a lot on the military. Non-defense discretionary spending is a pretty small slice of the pie. Is the money even there to offset if we're going to increase this by 50%?
Well, the money is there, but it's not in places where people are willing to talk about it. One of the things we talked a lot about in this hearing was the fact that we spend $6 per senior on every $1 we spend on children. Is that a budget that makes sense? Is sending checks to people who might not need them the top priority when we should be making sure that programs like Social Security don't become insolvent in 6 years, which is going to happen? But we need to look at all areas of the budget. We need to put everything on the table, look at our healthcare, look at our retirement, look at other areas of defense, just non-defense discretionary. We're not going to be able to find the savings if we don't look at all parts of the budget. DOGE, for instance, I think focused on very tiny slivers and missed some of the areas like healthcare, for instance, where some of the most savings can be found. We're going to have to get serious. The situation that we're seeing right now in the Middle East, that's kind of the wake-up call, but this was true even before this. We have got to get serious. We're going to have to look at every single one of the slices of that pie chart.
Do you worry, Maya, and I don't know what you're hearing from lawmakers on this, but the idea of a supplemental becoming a reconciliation bill, essentially, the president asks for more money to prosecute the war against Iran, and lawmakers say, fine, but I need to have mine too. And this turns into a very well-decorated Christmas tree by the time it reaches the floor. Lawmakers see an opportunity, a vehicle to attach stuff to it. They may not need a reconciliation bill. Is this going to be the next train like that leaves the station?
I so worry that everything can become a Christmas tree right now. There's no norm anymore that we basically budget. We barely put out budgets, right? Regularly, the budget committees don't put forth budgets, and they're almost never adopted. We don't deal with the trade-offs. And basically, a lot of lawmakers have figured out that the best way to kind of pander to the public is give more things without having to pay for them. And so then it becomes a race for who can borrow more. We're seeing this in the talk about how to make things more affordable, for instance. So yes, any supplemental is almost surely going to have other unrelated items piled on. The supplemental will probably be too large, and other items that are unrelated will probably be thrown in, sort of that horse trading of trying to get other people's votes. We need to bring back some real structure to the budgeting process We know emergencies will happen, for instance. We should set aside resources in advance each year in the budget so that there's already an emergency savings pool set aside rather than having to borrow more. But you bet I worry about this right now before a midterm election where things are getting political, as if they ever aren't. We will surely see people bidding up the cost of any emergency bill that they start to discuss, whatever form it takes.
Maya, we just have about 30 seconds left here, but obviously all of this is on the spending side. On the revenue side, if the administration were to decide to pursue a, say, gas tax holiday because of the higher energy prices emanating from this conflict, what revenue impact would that have?
Yeah, so the gas tax, depending on how many months one puts out, it's quite costly. You're talking about tens of billions of dollars adding up very quickly. And importantly, it doesn't actually end up making the costs cheaper. Those things lead into more demand for the product, which actually pushes up the cost of gas. So I know it's not what people want to hear, but gas tax holidays aren't effective and they are expensive.